This is the thing that is most frustrating for the target.
Yeah.
Is that the dark personalities can really put on a good show of being the good one. And with dark personalities, it does not take two to tango. You've got an innocent person who's a good person who's being targeted. And even though they might react at times or whatever, it's so provoked. And they can do it because of a number of things. One is because they don't experience fear, and they love this about themselves, right? Yeah. They see themselves as very superior to others who do emote. Some people go onto my social media sites and go, oh, poor people, they don't feel emotions, it must be terrible for them. No, they love being the way they are. Even if they could change, they wouldn't. They prefer to be like this. They think they're superior. But because they don't experience fear, when they tell lies, and they make up huge lies about other people. But it sounds convincing because they'll often use emotional language. But they don't experience fear when they lie. So they can look you in the eye, and because they've got that lack of emotion, they can seem grounded. So it's actually a coldness, but it can appear as gravitas. The second thing is, that is all they think about. You know, you might have someone on a board of an international company and you think, oh, they've got better things to do with their time. No, this is where they get their juice of their life from, is the manipulation. So they'll still do all this stuff, you know, this unrelenting attention to personal purpose to target people. And others would think, really? You know, as if they're going to do that to you when they're, you know, on this board or they're a surgeon, but they do. A third time is that they are very good at positioning their manipulation in a way that seems positive. And I always say one red flag does not a dark personality make. So you can't just think because you see this one thing, but there's a lot in my work. There's a lot of red flags. So it is a lot easier where you just go, oh, yeah, there's that. That's why all these subsets like covert narcissism and coercive control and all these subsets are not as good, because you just don't get all those red flags where you can quickly go, yes. It's a bit harder because there's not as many of the red flags and some of the key ones aren't in those subsets. If you can just find yourself in this one group of attributes and tactics, you don't have to worry about all the differences. And besides, we don't want to be focused on the differences. We want to be focusing on the common attributes and the tactics, so we all get educated on them.
The following is a conversation with Dr. Karen Mitchell, one of the world's leading experts in dark personalities, such as narcissists and psychopaths. Her research to understand the attributes and tactics of dark personalities is comprehensive and nuanced. Her work has broken away from the flawed tradition of using self-report data from psychopaths. That's self-report data from people who take pleasure in lying and causing confusion. Instead, Dr. Mitchell's work uses the expertise of over 50 professionals who average 22 years experience working with people of dark personality. From this work, she has developed the persistent predatory personality model that helps us assess whether we are dealing with a dark personality. This is a model of 20 attributes of people without a conscience. This kind of clarity is invaluable for victims who are often in the throes of dizzying manipulation and cognitive dissonance. Dr. Mitchell is both a scholar and a practitioner with 30 years practical experience working in corporate culture change and 20 years experience as an advocate in the family courts. Ultimately, Dr. Mitchell's work can help us to understand the worst of humanity. Dark personalities thrive on chaos and confusion. We need clarity to protect ourselves and those around us. And now, here's my conversation with Dr. Karen Mitchell. What compels you to study dark personalities?
In my 30 years of working in large organizations internationally, I have seen the huge negative impact that what I refer to as dark personalities or human predators have on not just individuals and teams, but on whole organizational cultures and also on the environment and the social fabric of communities and 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 I've worked with targets in organizations as well, and it's just so sad how impactful in a negative way these people are. And I've also been an advocate in the family court for nearly 25 years now. And again, where you get to the family court and something's going for quite a long time between two people, it's usually not a high conflict. It's referred to often as high conflict. It's not. You've got a predator or a dark personality using or weaponizing the justice system to harm and control their former partner and often their children. They do not experience love or are driven by affinity. They have brain anomalies of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, so they're quite different to us. They don't experience emotions like empathy or joy, but they do get satisfaction from control and manipulation. They're very different animals. So I've had a lot of experience with the victims of higher functioning dark personalities that are not in prison. And look, to use a technical term, it sucks. It's really harmful and distressing for people, to the point where they can often choose to commit suicide if they are targeted by a dark personality. So I just wanted to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, your work certainly does, and we'll get into the value of your work as we go. You're getting at sort of an us and them idea, and your PhD work starts with a quote from Edmund Burke: "Whilst men and women are linked together, they easily and speedily communicate the alarm of any evil design. They are enabled to fathom it with common counsel and to oppose it with united strength. Whereas when they lie dispersed, without concert, order, or discipline, communication is uncertain, counsel difficult, and resistance impracticable." What does that say about us, about what we need to do?
Well, it is a bit of an us and them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the world who believe that anyone can be helped and that we all have good in us somewhere. Look, I used to believe that, but from what I've seen now, because I am like warm-hearted and I want to make a difference to people, but I realize now through all of my research experience that some people are not able to change. And certainly the brain anomalies would suggest that they are very different. They're structured differently. Their motivations are different. They are very different. They just look like us. So, yeah, in terms of what needs to be done, I think it needs to start with education, because unless you've been targeted, like those of us who have been targeted understand the incredible destructive force they have and no boundaries. Most of us stop at some point in where we're willing to go. These people don't. So when they threaten you, you know that what they're saying will happen if you don't conform. So the control they have is very powerful. And so I think in the first instance, we need to educate, because there does need to be, in terms of that quote that you read, we all need, those of us who are not predatory, and I think it's about upward of 10% of the population. There's a lot of them. It's just we have been misled on how to recognise them. And that's a whole different story. But yes, in the first instance, it's about educating and getting people to accept, who have not been targeted, the depth of the harm that these people cause.
Yeah. And so in your work, in the data, you found that maybe the best way for people to get educated is to talk with victims or with experts who have worked with victims, which also your work did through surveys and things. And you had two major questions: the attributes and the tactics. I'd like to start with the attributes. What did you find are the attributes of dark personalities?
Yes. So the attributes, the most powerful attribute that drives them is control and dominance. So, and control might be it might be an accountant sending you 10 different invoices that are all sort of wrong, and so you can't pay them, and so you can't and then you spend all this time reviewing and change. That could be an element of control. It can be control over a body during a rape. It could be control over a group of people. It can be control like that, of administrative control. So it can be in any form, but we haven't learned how to see it in the higher functioning form. And the other attributes, very much they are predatory. So, and they don't experience emotions. So their emotional world is very different to ours. So, if you don't experience joy, or, a sort of a thrill around just enjoying life and affinity with others, etc., how do you then, where do you get your kicks in the world? And for them, it is control, manipulation, exploitation. So they are manipulative, they're dishonest, but they're also predatory in the way that they operate. So they look for victims, just like predators in the wild. They look for people who are generally people who are sick or separate from the pack, already a bit isolated, or older or younger. And then they isolate them from the pack. They separate them. So they might say to, like in a corporate sense, for example, they might say, Sally's really busy at the moment. Let's just not get her into this meeting because she's got so much on. So they always position things in a way that is, acceptable. They're incredibly crafty in the way they do things. And so eventually, Sally gets left out of meetings, and the dark personality or predator will, and when I say predator, I don't mean sexual predator specifically. Mm-hmm. I just mean predatory in terms of taking advantage of other people. It could be in any way, mentally, financially, sexually, in a whole range of ways. So they'll isolate. So they pick more vulnerable people generally. They will isolate them from their networks, which in and of itself is very disheartening for people. We rely on, and I was watching one of your podcasts with another guest that you had who was talking about this exact same thing. We rely on, we are who we are through other relationships. We like to think that we're very individual, but we love that affinity and to be with others and at some point, right? And so this isolation that they do is incredibly damaging. And then they weaken, so that they choose, and my research shows very strongly that dark personalities or predators do choose specific types of people. They are targeted for marriage or relationships, for, in workplaces, in religion. There's a lot of this that goes on in religious organizations, in youth groups. They do choose. So they look for vulnerability, they isolate, and then they weaken as you will see animals in the wild do, they weaken their prey. So they might do this by undermining or demeaning or gaslighting. Yes. So it's referred to as gaslighting, which means that they play with your head. So you think that you're going crazy. Gaslighting is a word that's based on a movie, I think from the 1940s, where a couple lived in this large apartment, but they owned the one next door, or it was empty, and they had gaslit lighting, and the husband wanted to was doing this, destabilizing, and he would go next door and turn the gas down in their apartment so the lights would go down, and then she would say, "Did you just notice the lights go down?" And he would say, "No." So she started to think she was going crazy, right? And that's part of their, they do this in a huge way with their victims, where they destabilize them and weaken them. And then, eventually they will go in for the kill. And the higher functioning ones, do that in a way that is not physical. The ones that are lower functioning, my data shows, the ones that might have lower intelligence or not as good at impulse control capability or not as a different type of upbringing, these ones will tend to lash out, and that's where this physical, and they don't have emotions, but they have this pathological anger that is like when prey have their meat taken away from them. So and if you're in the presence of it as a target, it's terrifying. And people talk about their eyes going black. So they have a neurological thing where the pupils of their eyes dilate, even if it's a bright room. So it's and they'll often bring themselves closer physically to the victim, and it's terrifying. This is also discussed in my PhD because some of my participants were also victims as well as working in the space professionally. So when they go in for the kill, it might be that they're so weak that the person, sadly, the target suicides, or they take the children away in the courts, or by arguing that this person has mental health issues, which they may have, but they'd be caused by the dark personality or the predator. But usually they don't. They just manipulate these circumstances, or in religion they might remove them from the congregation. So eventually there is a death, metaphorical or in fact suicidal, or murder or whatever, but it's very serious. And we have not been educated. I mean, the question we have to ask is, why is it still going on? Why aren't we in a better position to be able to recognize these predatory or dark personalities, because there are millions and millions of them around the world. And I think there's many, many more outside of jail than inside of jail. So, that's a question. Why don't we understand the red flags a lot more? Why don't we have a pattern of attributes that we can use in the courts to identify them, where they don't physically murder, but they really kill people off emotionally and mentally and socially and reputationally?
It seems one of the themes in your work was that there's an aim to destroy. That while there's one person maybe who's a target, if there are other people who are in a social system who are used to, make a fan club around the pathological person, but there's someone who you said go in for the kill. There's really something there. And you mentioned prisons. We've also talked a little bit about how control came up in your work as well. It seems that was something that was missing in a lot of the research on psychopaths that was done before your work. There wasn't quite the same understanding of that importance of control. What is the distinction there?
Well, that's a really interesting point, because one of the most commonly used tool to assess psychopaths in the prison population is the PCL-R, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which was developed by Robert Hare. And a lot of people would probably know of Dr. Robert Hare. He was the first person who talked about no empathy in the 80s, actually. And he came up with this list of, they're not all attributes. Some of them are outcomes, like revocation of conditional release from prison. So they revoke that. So some of them are outcomes. Some of them, he calls them items, although I noticed recently he calls them attributes, but they're not. Some are items, some are outcomes, some are attributes. So he brought out this list. And because forensic mental health professionals were looking for something to assess people on at that time, who seemed to function normally in the population but did all these engage in very harmful behaviours without remorse, they jumped on Bob Hare's checklist because it did give some attributes, but it doesn't contain the element of control and dominance, and that's their biggest driver. And to me, that's just astounding. And again, you've got to ask the question, why is that? Because they can exercise control and dominance in prison, because in my research, I had both forensic and non-forensic specialists who work in the area. They work with dark personalities, with who and their victims. So some of them were outside of prison. So my research, and their average experience is 22 years continuous experience with dark personalities and their targets. So it's pretty comprehensive. The actual experience, some of them are a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So they're very much experts. And some of them, for example, working with cult leaders and cults, in surgery, medicine, law, military, politics. So they were working with dark personalities in all of these areas and their targets. But I also had forensic specialists who've been working with ones that engage in more overt destructive behaviours. So one of my research participants is the FBI profiler who's caught the highest number of serial killers. It was the broad spectrum in my work, and control and dominance very obviously came out as the highest driver. And this is cumulatively over 1,000 years of experience with dark personalities. Now, a lot of the research that's been done on dark personalities is by actually asking them questions about themselves. And it's about ones in prison. And if you've been targeted, as you have, Brad, you know they're never going to tell the truth, not because they want to hide something. Most of us, if we don't tell the truth, it's because we feel embarrassed or guilty or whatever. They just do it because they can, and they enjoy doing that stuff. They enjoy playing with our heads and misleading us. And the higher functioning ones don't want us to know what they're like, what the red flags are, so they can continue to get away with their dark lives, because what we see is just the facade. So hold on, where am I going with this? I forget what you actually asked me. I was on a roll.
I think we were talking about the distinction of control as being an element that had been missed in the past in a lot of the work in prison populations.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing is, and also, I mean, we have the distinction of narcissism as well. And we have covert narcissists, malignant narcissists, vulnerable narcissists. Yeah. The more different classifications we have of all these names, Machiavellians, dark triad, dark tetra, the harder it is for us to focus in on what the reality is of the red flags. Mm-hmm. Right. So some of the dark personalities themselves are making this stuff up in academia and research to keep us off the track. And that came out in my data. That's not just my view, although it is my view because I've encountered it in trying to get my work out with the academics. It's very much a closed shop. Anything that challenges that PCL-R, this is all in my book, which is taking a long time to get out there. Someone said the other day, "Are you really writing a book because you talked about it for so long?" I'm almost finished. Great. I promise. But the chapter, there's one chapter that was a bit more difficult to write, and it's just taken me a bit longer. But the other thing that's missing in a lot of these models is sadism. And I talk about sadism in the broadest sense of the word. So sometimes we think sadism is physically hurting someone, but I talk about sadism in terms of they enjoy humiliating, demeaning, disadvantaging, manipulating, exploiting. There's this whole and when I say enjoy, it's more they get satisfaction from it. That's one of the things that rings their bell. And again, it's hard for people to accept this because it's so different to how normal people are motivated. So sadism came out hugely in my data, and that's not in most of the models. In fact, that's what the dark tetrad is. In 2002, two researchers said, we think sadism is a fourth dark personality type. So the first one is psychopaths. This is the dark triad that a lot of people have heard of. Psychopaths, narcissists, Machiavellians, that's the dark triad. And then they've added everyday sadism as a fourth type to make it the dark tetrad. Well, my research does not support that. It shows that all dark personalities have this want and this satisfaction in doing these things. Like, and normal people, like eating out, getting your kids to eat out of a dog bowl, like stuff that we would just think, really, this can't be happening. They must have mental health issues. They must, someone's lying, but they do all this sort of stuff. And it's going on everywhere in the world, like a lot, except their facades are so good at hiding this stuff, particularly, again, the ones that are lawyers and doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists and academics and, chefs and journalists. They're just so good at hiding it. And so one of the things, unfortunately, that's happened is when Bob Hare published his checklist, all of these researchers, instead of continuing to delve into the attributes of dark personalities and their drivers, they all just took Bob Hare's checklist items and started studying those. I mean, it's extraordinary what has happened in the world of research into dark personalities and predators. We've just been led off course in so many different ways, and which puts us at risk. So Bob Hare then tried to overlay his model into workplaces, white-collar psychopaths, and into domestic violence and coercive control, and to overlay something that's developed from criminals that have engaged in, serial killers and all that, to overlay that onto the sophistication of CEOs and surgeons, it's just not going to give you a subtle enough, nuanced enough representation to be able to see them. And yet Bob Hare has pushed that with him and with his supporters, a number of other researchers in there, and it really has stopped us. And then you've got things like coercive control. So I think in the area of domestic violence, coercive control has become a really big thing. But I think that's been developed in the absence of having control in anything else, right? So, but the problem with coercive control, and I really want to just say I really support the people who've pushed for legislation around coercive control, and it's taken a huge effort, and it is really important work, but it's limited again, right? It's all the representations we have of these predatory type subsets, which makes it harder for us to get them into prison or to get them into the court system. Because, for example, if you're looking at coercive control, where they talk about the isolationary tactic that I've already discussed and other sorts of things, that doesn't really incorporate sexuality, for example, coercive control. And sexuality is a huge part of their world. This came out of my data really strongly. So they will be a journalist, like with a high profile, and pedophilia on the side, doing all this stuff with kids and images, and or it could be any sort of sexual orientation. Or I don't want to actually go into that specifically because it's a very particularly at the moment, it's a very sort of political area, sexuality and everything. But they do have no boundaries, and they're fascinated by all sorts of sexual stuff. So with coercive control, you're limited to the isolation and the destruction, emotional and mental destruction, and the control element of it, which they often see as financial control. But with people that are higher functioning, financial control is not the thing. It's other sorts of control. So it's also a bit limited in terms of socioeconomic. So again, what my data shows is all these areas, like all the types of narcissists, Machiavellians, coercive control, are just subsets of one dark personality type that has remained hidden by design and by the way that they've chosen to do research. It depends on who's doing the research. Some of them are dark personalities themselves, which has come out in my research, so they've actively misled us. And others have just, chosen self-reporting, which is so ridiculous. But I don't know, because it's easier. You've got them in prison, it's easier to just ask them. And this one dark personality type has 20 attributes, and they all use the same tactics. And I mentioned earlier some of the attributes, which are predatoriness, manipulative, control and dominance. Another one is brazenness, because they don't experience fear. They are incredibly bolshy, or, in terms of what they're willing to do, stuff that we would be too embarrassed or ashamed, or we wouldn't even think of doing.
Yeah.
Like, pretending to be the victim and going onto a social media platform and talking about being the victim of, I don't know, parents or a partner who's a dark personality, when in fact you're the perpetrator. You're the dark personality. I mean, and then they go on and on for years about how they've been, treated, and it's all just lies. So the brazenness is another attribute, and I haven't actually seen that in any model or conceptualization of dark personalities, but that's a really big one. And again, these attributes are really important to show all the red flags, and because we can see them a lot quicker, whereas these subsets don't help us as much. But I understand why people have moved towards these subsets in the absence of other data, accurate data and nuanced data, and we want to know what's happened to us if we've been targeted. So we think about, are they a covert narcissist or a malignant narcissist, because we have the absence of data to really help us. Whereas what my research does, I hope, is to really help with showing these are the attributes and these are the tactics. And there's 25 tactics that came out. Isolation was just one of them. And they all use the same tactics. It's like they go to, they study predatory behavior 101 at uni because they all use exactly the same stuff. It must be something to do with the brain differences, I think, because it's so identical between all of them. So I'm hoping that we won't have to use these subsets anymore, that eventually we'll be able to go to the 20 attributes and the 25 tactics, and everyone will feel confident that their experience fits within that model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think about that when I think about kind of trying to summarize what do I resonate with in your work. And it's something like that the existing models that we have, I think, are often, you look at something that's clinical, something for a professional wants to diagnose something, or you look at something like the PCL-R, and you start to get caught up in all of that. But if we have something that's more for someone who's experienced this, to just try and understand, oh, I was dealing with a dark personality. This is who this person is. This is these are their attributes. These are their tactics. That there's a certain relief and clarity that comes from that and comes from understanding your model. You group the attributes as well. So it's even more simplified. You take your 20 attributes down to 4 groupings.
Yeah, they drive the agenda was the first grouping. And which 5 attributes did I put under that grouping?
Under that grouping, a drive for control, power, dominance, self-view of superior and special, entitled, a pathological, explosive inner response to being compromised or challenged, vengeful, uncompromising.
Yes. So all those attributes fit in the fact that so they punish. That vengeful thing,
Yeah.
Those of us who've been targeted know that if we do anything outside of what they like, they will punish us. And that's the vengefulness. So what's the second grouping?
The second group, they are motivated and operate differently and darkly. And the attributes that fall under that group, predatory, including exploitative, sadistic and cruel, has a low regard for laws, regulations, and agreements, as well as social and moral codes, sexual/relationship boundarylessness, unreasonable expectation of others.
Yes. So all these attributes came out of my data very strongly. And that unreasonable expectations of others, I have not seen in any of the sub conceptualizations either, like, malignant narcissists or coercive control or Machiavellianism. But that came out quite strongly, the unreasonable expectations of others. And I've written a lot about that in the PhD if anyone wants to check it out. What was the third grouping?
Yeah, and just on that unreasonable expectation, I'll just add that that was really eye-opening for me. But like in the beginning, when you talked about the accountant who might send you down 10 different rabbit holes, when you deal with these people, sometimes they just set you up for failure. But it seems as though they're trying to pull you along to something bigger. Group number three, the truth is not easy to distinguish or believe. And that is one, they actively cultivate the facade of normal. Two, they are chameleon-like. Three, they are dishonest. Four, they are devious and manipulative, including calculated, and involving consciously misleading others to be inadvertently complicit. The dark personality superpower, exclamation point. And five, unwillingness to accept responsibility for negative impacts they cause.
Yes, so it's hard to hold them to account because of this set of attributes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they weave this fabric, I think was the word you used, a fabric of fact and fiction that's so hard to pull apart. Group number four, they don't experience feelings in the same way as others. So they're without authentic emotion. Emotional responses are acted. They're callous. They're unremorseful, self-interested, and brazen.
Yes. Well, I decided to put them into those categories to just make it easier to get it,
Yeah.
how they, come together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see this as, there's so much in the world of, the red flags of the covert female narcissist and we get down to these fine groupings. If you know that you're dealing with someone who hits these four things, they drive the agenda in a hard way. They're motivated and operate differently and darkly. The truth is not easy to distinguish or believe. They don't experience feelings in the same way as others. What can a person do when they recognize this in someone they're dealing with?
Oh, gee, that's a tough one because it depends on the circumstances and
Yes.
it depends on the context.
Hmm.
So it could be in a church context. It could be in a corporate context. It could be in a medical health hospital context. Could be in a domestic relationship context. It could be as a friend. It can be a service provider. It can be a financial planner. Like it just could be any context.
Yeah, could we narrow it maybe just to kind of get at your expertise? So I think most people want to be believed by the people around them. So maybe to start there, if you just want to tell someone close to you that you're dealing with someone who's dangerous.
Yeah, well, because other people don't see through them because of that
Mm,
third category where they
yeah,
actively cultivate this perception of being normal, it is difficult. I think there's a few things I would say in any context is to be not emotional. When we're overly emotional, when we try and describe this stuff to people, people start to think, oh, they sound a bit, over emotional. And of course you are because
yeah,
you're being threatened in some way and you're starting to see how dangerous this person is. But because a lot of people just can't get it, firstly, a lot of people don't want to get it because it's just too hard. Secondly, a lot of people haven't been targeted and don't get how dangerous they actually are. You just have to be rational. And one of the problems also is that we often try and describe one action that's happened, where that one action is on its own not a big deal. And so I would often say describe 5 actions. Think of 5 things in your head
yeah,
that that show a pattern of behaviours. And then if you're trying to explain it to somebody, say, here are the 5 patterns of behaviours. Another thing I say to people is use my model, use the work and say, look, here are these attributes that have come from all these experts from all around the world. And look, this person, they are showing control. They are providing this facade to everyone. They are. So when you can see something fits into a established model, that can help as well. Yeah, look, in a corporate sense, it's good to always, and in a domestic situation, diaries are really important, dates and times, so that you have a record, because you start to forget. You get caught up when you're being targeted in the, the morass of it all, everything that's going on. But it's really important because you think, oh, I'll remember because it's so hurtful or it's so bad. But then there's 20 other things happen in the next 2 weeks and you think that's gone out the window. So for my book, that's actually been an interesting thing. I've had insights like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever, and I've noted them at the time and I've gone back and thought, oh, yeah, I would have left that out, So, yeah, it's doing a diary of exactly what's happening. That's good in corporates as well. Take someone with you. And I would recommend that in corporates, in domestic situations, in religion. Just have someone else there. They can't get away with stuff as much then, and they recalibrate. I actually saw this person recalibrating at the time when this person realized that I had someone with me. And the thing is, they do, when you see through them, and with me, unfortunately, it is obvious the point often that I see through them. And then I get, then I get targeted because it's like, so they'll just keep it going. So that's one of the ways that I stop it, is to bring other people in. Not so much as that. The dark personalities have what is often referred to as flying monkeys, which I think that comes from the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz. The witch had all these monkeys that flew with her, and they supported her, right? So the dark personalities do engage others as part of their to support them. So they get a lot of others on side, but this is different. This is actually getting others to observe what's going on, others to protect the conversation and the outcomes. And having witnesses is very important. So this is not manipulate. Dark personalities will manipulate people to support them, and will manipulate information inside of that, and will provoke their victims so as that their flying monkeys really think, oh, gee, they're right. This is going on, with this other person. So there's a lot of manipulation. What I'm talking about is not manipulation. It's about other people that might have experienced the same thing with this person, or having witnesses. It's different. It's more factual. It's not manipulated. I just wanted to make that distinction. Because also when I say there's two things that are really important if you want to understand if someone is a dark personality or not. One thing is research. We must do research into their background because the red flags become more evident. And the other thing is knowing what the red flags are. And as you've said, my work, I hope, does seem to resonate with people around, the red flags are inside of all of that. So you have to know that. So you know what you're looking for. And I want to make the distinction on this as well, is that dark personalities will stalk, but in a broad sense of the word stalk, not like we might think of it. So they look for information that they can use against their victims. They look for like they want to know dates where their victim or target is going to be. They want to know who's in their victim and target's life so they can approach them. It's sort of a manipulated form of stalking. Whereas as potential targets, we need to do research. That is not stalking. It is protective. It is getting data. It is looking for data. Now, what the dark personalities do is point at the victim target and say, oh, look, they're stalking me. So they reverse attribute everything as well. So it's really hard. But that's why I'm making these distinctions, because the waters get muddied where you have a target and a dark personality, because the dark personality, whatever they've done that's wrong, they will say that their victim's done it. And then the victims, and usually before the victim even sort of gets what's going on, and then the victim comes out and says, no, they did that. And it just looks like he said, she said, right? Mm-hmm. But it really isn't. So we do need to be good at really looking at, well, who do I believe here? And most people go, it's too hard. Well, that sucks, to use another technical term. Well, you know, it's like the poor victim is really getting this horrible stuff going on and could potentially even suicide. We don't want people to say, oh, it's too hard. We need people to do a bit of research, know the red flags, and say, oh, yeah, there's incongruency here between what this person's saying, whereas there's not with this one, right? So, yes, we need to step in and support people and really get this stuff, because, yeah, and I've seen that in a situation recently where that happened, where everyone just stood back, like they're waiting to see what's going to happen. But it's not about waiting. It's about researching and really looking at, you know, because you'll have two parties both accusing each other, really looking at what are the red flags, what's actually being said here, and what's my sense? What's my sense of? Mind you, they did do a thing in court, with judges. They did a study, I think it was, I forget what year it was, but where they actually got dark personalities that to say something, and then they used just a normal person to say something, and the judges found the dark personalities more compelling, more convincing. It was a blind study that was done. Yeah. So, you know, but intuitively, I do think, though, a lot of the time we can sense whether what's going on. With dark personalities, there's often an underlying anger or resentment that they're even being in a position where they have to be doing this reverse attribution, I call it, where they attribute their actions to the poor victim. So you'll get this sort of chip on the shoulder thing, because they're very entitled. So there's little things like that, and there's lots of things. That's why, and it's all described in my PhD, and there'll be more in the book when it finally comes out. Yeah. But yeah, there's lots of these little things we can see.
With these things that we can see too, we could talk maybe about tactics too. So we talked a lot about the attributes, maybe identifying the tactics as well.
Yeah, the tactics are what they use to defeat others, to avoid accountability and exposure, to punish. So these are the tactics. One of them, and there's 25 that emerged in my data. One of them, for example, is weaponization of the justice system. So they use the system to control and punish, even when they're guilty. So you think, oh, well, you know, they can't come at me for this because I haven't done anything. Well, that doesn't mean anything. They will just do, even when they're guilty as anything, they'll just file in the courts if they've got money, because otherwise it could be difficult for them. And there was a situation here which I probably best not to talk about, actually, but yes, where it's a very high profile case of someone doing that, but they got caught out and actually they got found guilty, and the two journalists were thrilled. It was a very long case of very high profile person here.
Our friend Mark
so
Vicente
that's one of that.
Mark Vicente would probably want to chime in about NXIVM and how they used to just pound people with hundreds of lawsuits and things like that.
Yes. That is what they do. They file and file and file. And one of the things that they do, they're very relentless. I call it unrelenting attention to personal purpose. Yes. They just keep going and going. It's like this fanaticism on steroids when they start targeting someone. So they exhaust them and confuse them. And in the end, often they give up. But I'm finding more and more people aren't giving up. People are starting to now make a stand, like Mark Vicente, like you are, like I am, and to really stand up. So, and there needs to be more of us, and there are. I think I see more and more people coming out about this. Another tactic they use is delaying and blocking. So if they get taken to court by someone else, they will just delay and put off the court date, and then they'll block, right? So they won't, in discovery, they won't put forward documents, or, there's stuff, again, we wouldn't, as kind of normal people, we sort of think, oh yeah, I've got my court date, you sort of just go with what you're meant to do. These people do not do that. So you get exhausted because you're constantly the goalposts are moving all the time. And that's another tactic, is confuse. They confuse and confound. So the invoice example that I talked about, where they'll send a whole lot of invoices, and you spend all your time like trying to decipher what's really going on, and then they'll say, oh, okay, and they'll seem like they're being normally, normal and whatever, but then they'll send something else that's manipulated, and then something else. And let's say, for an example of an accountant, if you want to move on, there's only two in Australia. There's two ways you can be prevented from going to another accountant. One is if you haven't paid your invoice. So they can just keep on doing. So this is the control and manipulation attribute, but it's also the confusion and the confounding tactic, where they just bring all this confusing stuff in and control you in that way. It's really horrible, because you just feel like you're drowning in all of this different stuff. And even then, when it's all done, they'll find something else, right? So this is this confusing thing. What else in the tactics? Blocking, confusing. I mean, there's heaps of them. I think that's enough for now.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention any of them?
Well, I'd like to get at something that you mentioned earlier too, which is that you said it's as though you use sort of an Australian phrase. They all go to uni, like Psychopath Uni. It is the tactics, when you start to see it, are so similar. It's as though they've all studied them together. And I am baffled at how this works, because it would seem so strange to me that someone who is doing this today, who's, say, a 42-year-old man with assets and a social network, could be using very similar tactics to a drug dealer in the 80s who's 25 years old. And yet they do. How is that?
Well, I don't know. In my PhD at the end, because at the end of a PhD, you have to say, what are your thoughts after all of this? And one of mine was, we have to do so much more work on the brain, PET scans, MRIs, all sorts of, to find out what's going on neurologically. It must be, I think, a neurological thing. They are different. They are different animals. They are motivated differently. They get... their emotional world is very different. I don't know. You're so right, though. I get so many people on social media saying, oh my goodness, like they all use the same things. I've been, someone will come on and say, oh, I've been targeted 3 times, and they use exactly the same tactics. One of the tactics is that they just sort of love to throw love to throw the cat amongst the pigeons. They like to, cause all this confusion. And then everyone argues with themselves about what's going on. That is what has happened in this area of predatory people. Yeah. The academics and researchers and some other so-called experts that come out and they've created all these, all these conceptualizations. And we just get into arguing. I noticed I even did it the other day with someone, getting into argument about whether narcissists are able to be changed or not, right? And the thing is, there are some people who have behaviors, they've had a lot of abuse, and they have some similar behaviors of dark personalities. So they've learnt to lie. They've learnt manipulation is the only way they can be safe. So they have a lot of these behaviors, and they are redeemable. They experience shame. Some of them are really tough with their behaviors, but they are really the victims of torture. A lot of them, they've been targeted by often dark personalities, and so they have these behaviors. But yes, they are. And I think we were arguing really. We were doing exactly what they wanted, the dark personalities, the cat amongst the pigeons. We were really debating something we didn't need to be. because we both could have said, look, there's these two types, and I'm talking about this type, I always talk about the types that do not experience shame or embarrassment, or, I talk about the hardcore dark personalities, that's their wiring, whereas other people will talk about the victim type ones with the same behaviours. And so that's why I talk a lot about predators and prey, that there's just really two groups. And then you've got other groups of normal people and other sorts of mental health conditions, but really you've got two big groups of the predators and the prey. And the predators, and there are so many of them, they'll impose all this stuff on the prey, and the prey have all these behaviors where they're going crazy, or they're, that they really feel it's when you're in that vortex of being targeted by one of these people, it is your whole world becomes consumed by it, and you do often. The targets can often react to things they ordinarily wouldn't react to, or so. That's why I don't like using all these terms like malignant, narcissist, vulnerable, because that's the cat amongst the pigeons stuff that they've orchestrated to stop us to get us to argue with each other when we're actually all on the same side. And so that's why I like just talking about the predators and the prey, because it's a much easier distinction. And the predators all have this common set of attributes. They all use the same tactics, and we don't need all those subcategories anymore. Yeah.
And Dr. Mitchell, that you've said, in your work, I think I mentioned earlier, the dark personality superpower exclamation point is manipulation. To take a quote from your work, I think this is from one of your surveys, so from one of your experts, they make a compelling lie or fabric of lies to undermine people who get in their way, or who may expose them, or who they don't like, or who they just decide to pick on, cultivating a network of supporters who will stick up for them regardless, and who have a particularly positive view of the dark personality from the way the dark personality has groomed them, or is getting something out of supporting the dark personality, and by withholding information. That depth of manipulation is so amazing. What makes this the dark personality superpower?
This is the thing that is most frustrating for the target.
Yeah.
Is that the dark personalities can really put on a good show of being the good one, and they can do it because of a number of things. One is because they don't experience fear, and they love this about themselves, right? Yeah. They see themselves as very superior to others who do emote. Some people go onto my social media sites and go, oh, poor people, they don't feel emotions, it must be terrible for them. No, they love being the way they are. And even if they could change, which a whole lot of programs around the world have shown they can't, even if they could change, they wouldn't. They prefer to be like this. They think they're superior. But because they don't experience fear, when they tell lies, and they make up huge lies about other people. But it sounds convincing because they'll often use emotional language. So they're so crafty, but they don't experience fear when they lie. So they can look you in the eye, and because they've got that lack of emotion, they can seem grounded. So it's actually a coldness, but it can appear as gravitas. So one reason they can get away with it is because of that, and that's a big thing. The second thing is that is all they think about. You might have someone on a board of an international company, and you think, or a surgeon, and you think, oh, they've got better things to do with their time. No. This is where they get the juice of their life from, is the manipulation. So they'll still do all this stuff, this unrelenting attention to personal purpose to target people. And others would think, really? As if they're going to do that to you when they're, on this board, or they're a surgeon, but they do. So one thing is the lack of fear, making them seem more sort of together. Another thing is that that they put so much time and effort into it. And a third time is that they are very good at positioning their manipulation in a way that seems positive.
I've heard you use the example of like something like, "Oh, the wife is sick," or she's going through a hard time.
She's not well. Yeah, she's got. Yeah, that's what I did use with Mark. Yeah, that yes, my partner. Yeah, she's not well. Why don't you just stay away for a little while? I'm really looking after her. Yeah, so you don't need to be there. And what's wrong? Well, she just had a few mental health issues, and there might be nothing. They often set it up before they even go down the track. So they've as soon as they see a tiny sign that you might have caught onto them, they set it up. The whole fabric of this elaborate trap, and it is like a spider web of stuff that they set up, and you don't even know as a target that it's going on behind your back. So at the point where it does hit the fan and stuff really comes out, the target has no social network because others, and they don't even know what's been said about them. There was one woman that I interviewed who she said as soon as it hit the fan with them, people would cross the street rather than talk to her, and at school pick up and drop off. And like, what do they say? And they make these assertions that are really extreme, like, "Oh, I found her sexually abusing one of our children," or "She's been stalking me." That, it might be in a corporate sense or some other sense. So they make these really these things that you think, people would never say stuff like that unless you meant it. And so and it's stuff that most of us, again, would we make up a lie is never going to be that extreme. We just feel sick at the about saying that about anyone, but they love it. They do this false narrative stuff, no shame, no embarrassment, brazenly. So they make up really bad stuff. If you're trying to wonder what a dark personality is made up about you can times it by 100 in terms of how much worse it is than what you can think about. And then you have also no chance of defending yourself either, because people don't talk about it because it's so bad, right? They don't bring it up with you as a target. And so it remains this unaddressed issue, which worsens as people talk about it more.
I've also seen it be deliberately vague too. So there would be an accusation that, something so controversial, and then people don't even want to unpack what that is, and so you just get a cloud on the victim instead.
Yes, that also happens. Yeah, I mean, they're masters at destruction with no shame or embarrassment or fear. Imagine that. It's like a robot of destruction that actually gets satisfaction out of doing this. So yeah.
And it starts, as you said, it starts before that moment when they really go for it. It's already being built up. There's a quote in your work, page 167, about how they isolate. The dark personality successfully ensures others feel uncomfortable about the target/victim and withdraw. So as soon as you're in their sphere, potentially, they're already separating you from people, and you may not even know it.
Yes.
And we've talked a little bit about grooming as well. There's that grooming word. I think people have a hard time understanding that happens to adults. But on page 185, the subtle and relentless grooming of everyone around them to believe in the created public persona. What characterizes grooming behavior in adults?
Oh, yes. Okay. So grooming is not just with children. Adults get groomed as well to believe certain things. For example, someone who's engaging in domestic violence might go onto a domestic violence charity, right? So they do things to actively cultivate that they're a good person. They might have a bunch of photos on their desk of all their kids. They have all these things that we tend to associate with being a good parent or a good, religious person, or, they're really into that. So that's why you get a lot of them in the church, in religion, because they will go there to hide. It's, people think, oh, they go to church, they're Christian or whatever religion, they're Buddhist or they're Hindu, you know, they're really a follower of whatever, Buddha or whatever. So then we let our guard down because we think, oh, they're a good person, they're in these institutions or they're in charities. Hold on, where was I? Again,
the grooming.
The grooming, yeah. I get lost. Yeah, so you can be in a family because they target a partner or they target people if they're a cult leader, or they target people who are more vulnerable, who tend to be looking for, who are well-intentioned, good people, looking to support others if it's a cult. And then, so they've already got people who are willing to believe stuff. And so some dark personalities, you don't even, people could be living with them or be their children or be whatever for years and never know they're a dark personality. That's how good they are at grooming. And all dark personalities have another life, right? They all have stuff that's hidden because their facade is not themselves. Right? It's the dark personality that is who they really are. So if you go and research these people, there's always dark stuff, that you'll find. That's why it's important to get it. In the absence of a murder weapon, these people who destroy people emotionally and socially and reputationally, that's where we need the evidence. That's of the patterns of behaviours, because we don't have a knife or a gun. So that's where we need to look for that. But they can groom people and have them completely convinced because of the, attending religions and charities and the photos of the kids and all this sort of stuff. And because they're often interacting with people who are susceptible. So yeah, is that answer your question about grooming?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we've got into how they pick the people who are more susceptible to these behaviors, what it could look like. One thing that I think I saw in your work too is that, if they're interested in a target, they may also become friends with the mother, the father, the best friend, and sort of encircle so that the target then has nowhere to go. But this whole thing, it happens in adults, I think is what we're getting at. And now people have some things to look at. Dr. Mitchell, what do you think makes it so hard for people to accept this dark core of the dark personality? We've talked about it a little.
That's a really good question.
And there's something there that is sticky.
Yeah, well, there's a few issues, and this actually came out in my research as well. Like, one is, I don't know, people just want to live a happy life, which is fair enough, right? You don't want to know about all this dark stuff. Like, let's just enjoy life. I mean, there's enough tough issues in the world at the moment without having to think, oh, gee, I better protect myself from dark personalities and read about all the red flags. So people just don't want to know, right? And secondly, often people think, well, it takes two to tango. Right. So, and because it is hard to see through it, they just step away, which is what we've talked about earlier in this conversation. And which is, that's a really tough thing. But that's what they do because they think, oh, well, both parties must have done something. With dark personalities, it does not take two to tango. You've got an innocent person who's a good person who's being targeted. And even though they might react at times or whatever, it's so provoked and like it is torture. When you look at the behaviours that eventually come out in the victims of dark personalities, you could overlay it on studies they've done on torture in war. It's the same. So, which is what I did. So it doesn't take two to tango, but I think that's a really big thing that prevents people supporting targets and victims and accepting it. What else is there? So people just don't want to know about it. Yes, another really big one is people think, oh, well, I haven't seen that in them. People want to wait until they see it. That's a huge one. Even with some of my colleagues, because I can see the red flags. I've been dealing with this stuff forever, right? And I see the red flags really quickly. My colleagues will be like, it's not generally, but there might be one or say, really? And there was a woman who, in my research, who ran the child sex abuse claims for the Catholic diocese, a really large Catholic diocese in the world. I won't say which one. But she would go to, someone in the Holy See and say, which is the 9 people that are around the Pope, like someone saying, she'll say, this person is sexually abusing children. And the person will go, well, really? They're a really nice person. But this is a woman who's been working on, child-related things for decades, and so experienced, right? This does my head in, because it's like people like her and myself are sort of like, I don't know, we're the specialists. We're like FBI profilers, but we're profilers on higher functioning ones, and we do have that insight. It's what our work has been forever. But people don't trust it. And if they wait till they see the red flags, it might never happen, right? So, and then people get hurt in the meantime. We actually have to start helping people, because that's how we're going to educate ourselves as people who have not been targeted. I have been, but for people who have not been targeted that don't get it, they've got to jump in and help, because they don't have to, but that's what's going to help save, I think, our species, like as human beings that have compassion and love. People need to start educating themselves, and the way to do that, again, see people, do I really want to educate myself on this dark stuff? I'd rather educate myself on Disneyland or, my new puppy. People want to focus on the light, which I understand, but could we just have a little bit where we focus on the dark, so we can save a lot of people from harm, including a lot of kids who really get compromised. Yes. So I think that's enough for that, for why don't people go there? Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wish I did do my PhD on Disneyland or puppies. It does get a bit dark. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Mitchell, for people who maybe could start to become more alert to this, what can we do to reconcile the deep ill intention of these people with their facade of being normal?
What can we do to reconcile? That's a good question. What's your answer to that? Have you got an idea?
Well, with the person who I've dealt with, when I looked at his behavior again from the assumption of ill intention, it became more clear to me that that was the root of his behavior. If I had just looked at his behavior and just tried to ask, is this ill-intentioned or not, it was harder. But when I just said, let's assume it is, what's going on here, he only made sense in the light of being a dark personality after I had actually examined it like that. So that's kind of how I work through it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because one of the issues is cognitive dissonance. Like, we think we can convince this person to get what I'm talking about. We can convince them to send the right invoice. They just must have stuffed up their systems. We make excuses for the behaviors because we just can't fathom it, right? Yeah. And again, this is where just knowing the red flags and the patterns of behaviors, as you've just said, that's a really good way of putting it. Like, if you try it on that way, if you know the dark personality attributes and tactics, you think, oh, shoot, yeah, that's what's going on here. This is about control and dominance. And, of course, someone's not going to make that many errors around invoices. And even in that one thing, that's a red flag. And then you see the shallow effect. And then you see they're blocking from other things, right? So it doesn't take long, actually, to put a whole lot of them together. And I always say one red flag does not a dark personality make. So you can't just think because you see this one thing, but there's a lot in my work. There's a lot of red flags. So it is a lot easier where you just go, oh yeah, there's that. That's why all these subsets like, covert narcissism and coercive control and all these subsets are not as good, because you just don't get all those red flags where you can quickly go, yes, 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 yes. It's a bit harder because there's not as many of the red flags and some of the key ones aren't in those subsets. And I like what you said before about if you can just find yourself in this one group of attributes and tactics, you don't have to worry about all the differences. And besides, we don't want to be focused on the differences. We want to be focusing on the common attributes and the tactics, so we all get educated on them.
And Dr. Mitchell, that's another strength of your work too that we haven't even talked about, is that you make space for distinctions. So I think people like to get caught up on, oh, he's a narcissist because he's grandiose and seeks lots of attention. But that's a distinction, but still under this dark personality thing that you have in your work.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So 3 levels of information or data came out of my PhD. The first level were the attributes. I wasn't even looking for tactics, but they came out. They just fell out of the data. They were all so clear in it. But then there's a 3rd level that came out of information, which was things that were different. So some of them are extroverted and some are more reserved. And some of them, that's because some of them put on a really extroverted facade and some don't bother putting on a facade at all because they're so confident in their capability or whatever. And so they just have that shallow effect. They don't bother putting it on. So there are differences there. There's differences around, what else were some of the differences? So extroverted, and there are quite a few that came out, but they're like normal human differences as well, like in terms of what were some? Oh, some are really into legacy and some are not. So some dark personalities love that they're going to just take themselves forward into the future and they'll write books and the history of the world and the history of all this stuff. Because they want that, and others are not into legacy at all, but you can see it in some, but not at all in others. So we don't want to be focusing on these differences. But yes, you're right. I think there were about 8 differences that came out in my research, and they're there in the PhD if people want to look at it. And also the way the attributes manifest is also different. According to, I mentioned it before, intelligence levels or impulse control capability or socioeconomic status. So the brazenness might come out differently. So, for example, someone might brazenly lie in court. If there's, don't have the money, they might lie in court. But they do have the money, they'll just pay someone to, and I've seen this happen, they'll just bribe someone in the court to pay them off to get a manipulated outcome, right? So it might be the same attribute of brazenness, but it manifests differently according to these things. This came out of my data. So yes, everyone doesn't have to be stuck in this one exact type. They can still find their dark personality in there, in this sort of research work, in this model that's come out of all this data. Is that the point that you're making?
I think so. Yeah. Because it's just easy when you're in the haze to want to get caught up in something so diagnostic, something you really need a professional for. And then even then, somebody who puts up a good facade can hide. But to see that these distinctions exist, and that I think that can be a relief for people who are trying to use your work and your model rather than trying to pick apart a very narrow diagnosis.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah. So it's not like I'm trying to, or this work kind of tries to make it all one type. It's not. There's still, but it does give us a lot easier roadmap generally for us to see them and for us to all share the same understanding. And certainly on social media, it has resonated with a lot of people quite rapidly. So, yeah. But yes, there are definitely differences. And at the back of my PhD, there's a big appendix of all the attributes and how all the research participants have made comments of how they've manifested differently in different contexts, like religion and corporates and hospitals and families, etc. So you can sort of see how this attribute of predatoriness might manifest in all different contexts, with different intelligence levels of the dark personality, different socioeconomic status, as I've been saying, different sort of upbringings, but still the same core attribute. Violence is not a fundamental part of dark personality. It is, according to Bob Hare, in his models and the refinement of his models. He's made other sort of assessment tools for different situations. It's a higher level attribute, which is, I call it a pathological anger reaction, which is, but a lot of them can contain it.
Yes.
And then they just take vengeance later. Yeah. They're never going to forget it, the dark personalities. So, but some will knife someone in the moment, but many, many more will contain that pathological anger reaction and compromise the person who elicited that reaction in them some time else or somewhere else. And you know what? You don't have to have done anything bad either to elicit that response in them. Like, you might have just, not called them or not, I don't know, had any contact for a couple of months. Or in prison, there was one of the examples in my research where these guys that were in a high security prison, one guy knocked the peas off one guy's plate, I kid you not, and 3 years later he was still talking to this woman about how he was going to get back at the guy who had knocked the peas off his plate, and with a huge vengeance, with this deep-seated scary, she was saying, like this deep-seated scary kind of, like, he ended up getting I won't say who, but someone on the outside to get to this person when he got out. Like, these people, as I said, I call it unrelenting attention to personal purpose. And that's why people get controlled by them. Yeah. Because they know there's no boundaries and they know that they'll just keep going. Yeah. So,
Well, Dr. Mitchell, before I ask my last question, for people who want to know more about you and your work, where should they look for you online?
Well, my website, my business is Kalmor, Kalmor, kalmor.com.au, and there's a link under the media section, a link to my PhD thesis. There's no paywall or anything. People are really welcome to look at it. So you could look at Kalmor, Kalmor. I'm on Instagram. No, I've just gone on Instagram. I haven't really done anything there. I'm on X under @Karen Mitchell, all smalls, __. And I do tend to post each day on there. I'm just going on to Blue Sky. I think that's all, really. Yeah. So just really on X.
Okay.
That's it.
We'll put a link to that in the description and a link directly to your PhD work as well. So people who want to see that right away can check that out. And you've got a book coming out soon, hopefully. So we'll get to that as well. And
all right.
Dr. Karen Mitchell, my final question is, you talked a little bit about the response that your work has got. I'd just like to know, we started at the beginning of what got you into this work. To come full circle, what's it been like for you to help other people?
Oh, really exciting. Like, it's great. Because I myself have been compromised by these people, it's really it's really rewarding for me to get this feedback from people, to say that it's really helped them and that it's helped them come to terms with what they've dealt with. In some cases, people have said, it stopped them from suiciding, which to me is just fantastic. And people who are also older saying, I've struggled with this my whole life, and finally I do really, you're stuff has really helped me, like at the, in their late 70s or something. It doesn't matter what age it is. People struggle with this, and for decades often, particularly if they're born to one of these people. It's, to grow up with one of these when you're the scapegoat child, the one that gets attacked, is extraordinarily painful and confusing for people. So it's been very rewarding. So, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do these podcasts, like I did with Mark Vicente, and eventually I will start doing my own podcast, but I haven't got my act together yet. So yeah.
Well, Dr. Karen
yes,
Mitchell,
thank you.
Yeah, for the work that you do for educating the rest of us, for the incredible amount of work that you put into your PhD work. I hope more people can see it and learn from it. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this work and for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity too. Thank you.
To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.